Hello and welcome to Camp Xbox. The mascot platformer is a mainstay in console gaming. Since Mario and Sonic became household names, many attempts have been made to craft another gaming icon. Some have done well, others have failed, and then there is Vexx, a 3D platformer with a lead character with an edge. This game has been requested a few times over the past year, so thank you for your recommendations. I was excited to give this one a full playthrough, and today, I will provide you with a bit of its history, lasting impact, and tell you how I felt about this game. All footage was captured off of an original Xbox, and I want to thank my YouTube channel members, campers, and camp counselors. And let's go ahead and hop into Vexx's history.
Vexx screamed as the talons bound themselves to him forever, and his fate to that of all a star.
Vexx's production dates back to 1999. The development team Acclaim Studios Austin had a long history of making solid titles in the 1990s, starting with a few mascot platformers like Arrow the Acrobat and Zero the Kamikaze Squirrel. By the late 90s, they had developed the Turok Trilogy and Iggy's Wreckin' Balls. During this time, they wanted to create a 3D platformer for the next generation, and they were greenlit in 1999, with things going into motion in 2000. Since the game was intended for the next generation and the team did not have tools to develop on those consoles yet, they built on the PC first. And this actually made it easier to swap code to the Xbox versus the other consoles. The lead character, now known as Vexx, was once named Clip, and then by E3 2001 had become Jinx. Along the way, the game had many similarities to Jak and Daxter, which were stripped away with the release of Jak and Daxter. By 2002, they unveiled the character Vexx, which would also be the game's name. The game was meant to be released in 2002, but it was delayed until 2003 to be polished. Even with that, there were still some time constraints, and the larger vision of the game had to be dialed back, such as when IGN hyped up that there'd be 18 levels. Many of those would be cut before the final release. While researching the history of this game, I came across a speedrun livestream with a developer interview that is well worth watching on its own if you're interested in the history of Vexx, and it's where I got a lot of good information about this game from. If you're interested, I'll include the link in the description. Vexx was finally released in North America on February 11th, 2003, with a European release later in April. It was released on GameCube, PS2, and Xbox. I have played this one before, but it was briefly, and well before I started this channel. So this game was like a fresh experience for me, and I played through it recently, and let me tell you how I felt about this game, beginning with the plot. Vexx has a darker plot than your typical platformer, wearing its T rating like a badge of honor. Portals across different worlds were created many years before the game's time period. Unfortunately, an evil force called the Shadow Wraiths discovered this, terrorized these portals, and killed those who made it. Many years later, the Shadow Wraiths led by Dark Yabu enslave Vexx's village. Vexx sneaks out and finds war talons that allow him to cling to any surface and fight enemies with more power. Unfortunately, this does not help him beat Yabu, and his grandfather is killed in the process. Vexx does get away, and with the help of an older man named Darby, he has to collect Wraith Hearts to reopen the portals and stop Yabu. It sounds like a ton of lore, and it really is, but it's only told over 3 cutscenes, and most of this game is strictly platforming gameplay, with hardly any story for you to follow. There are a few cool moments, like exploring a tapestry that recounts the Shadow Wraith invasion, and I like these small touches, but overall the story is just okay. The game is not too focused on that being its central pillar, and I'm not going to fault it for that, especially when the lore setup is solid enough. It's a classic fantasy tale, but with elements of slavery, and Vexx seeing his grandpa die, it is surprisingly dark. The villain Dabu is solid too, but that's mainly because of Brian Cox voicing him. It's a turn that makes it feel edgy, but also a bit more fun because of that. It's trying something a little different, and I can at least applaud it for that. Would I have liked more exploration of the lore, or more fleshing out for Vexx? Yes. But what's here sets you up well enough and gets you interested in the action and why the game is set up the way it is. Vexx is through and through a platformer of its generation, though I'd say it mostly takes notes from Nintendo 64 classics like Banjo-Kazooie and mainly Super Mario 64. It has you hopping between many different themed worlds and doing wildly different things that have you completing 9 different objectives in that world to claim a Wraith Heart. You can do it in any order and mix and match, going for ones you might find easy or fun. Vexx takes a lot of chances with these objectives, whereas most objectives in platformers like this would just have you doing platforming challenges. Here it mixes in a lot of mini-games. There is a great variety in what you do in this game. Every time you start a level, it can be something fresh and exciting. You could be in a giant living room where you need to turn on a game console and play Breakout. You might need to go through underwater domes and face a giant sumo wrestler, or hop into a piano and do a musical-themed platforming challenge. Vexx is the type of game that throws everything at the wall, which I find admirable, and it keeps this game fresh throughout. The controls work well, and they're simple. You have simple jumps and attacks, and using your power gauntlets you can do long jumps, ground pounds, and jumps that take you up higher. All of the moves in this game are seamless and feel great. I never had issues with the controls, but the camera is a pain point. It's essential in any platformer to see where you're going, but sometimes this game will take that away from you and put you in at a forced angle. Sometimes these angles make your jumps more challenging than they needed, and they do not allow for a good perspective. Other times, you'll have your camera get stuck to walls or roofs, and you have to awkwardly move around till it finds its way back to you. The lousy camera isn't constant, and most of the playtime will be fine, but it does get frustrating when the camera does get a little rough. The camera doesn't help when the game is already very challenging. The challenge, though, is not a negative for most of the playtime. The challenge is actually rewarding. You'll go through some platforming sections that require quick thinking and timing, and it's satisfying to pull off. Some of these Wraith Hearts are not specifically about accurate jumps on tight platforms, but are straight endurance tests. There are gigantic platforming levels that go upward, with you leaping around, balancing, and fighting enemies. They go on for what seems like forever. Especially if you fall off, you either are landing down at the bottom, or you have to restart from the bottom. And I can't stress how many times I was surprised that the platforming sections were still going, and then they would keep going after I thought that. It wears you down. It becomes less about having fun and more about just wanting to finish this specific platforming section. But there's only usually about one Wraith Heart per level that is one of these endurance tests. And some of them are quite fun, but then there's others that are just a pain to play. But besides that, this game does so much fun stuff that it's easy to overlook some of its flaws. The levels you go to can be so creative, like the giant house you crawl around in. There is so much to see, like traveling inside a grandfather clock or riding down the sink drain. There are some levels you have seen before, like frozen areas and deserts, but there are hearts in these that I found engaging and behind some fun challenges. I liked any time when you had to play a minigame or use the day and night cycle to open up a portal to a bizarre platforming challenge. It seriously tries it all, even having a section where you play with the camera upside down. That's one of the examples where it doesn't work well, but it's trying something different, and I like that. It's not a tedious, samey slog. You can always expect it to do something neat and cool, and with solid controls, I had a blast messing around with it. You can tell that a lot was left out of this game though, because a few elements feel underutilized. For one, there are suits in this game that offer power-ups for Vexx, but there's only 2, a lava one and a wing one that lets you fly. Both are hardly ever used, and weirdly, there just isn't any more. I would have loved to get various elements to control and solve more puzzles. It's the same for the day and night cycles. At night, enemies become tougher, but I found no advantage to playing then. The time of day changes a few hearts, but not as many as you'd think. It's neat to see the world shift from night to day, but it doesn't feel like it was used in the game meaningfully. These elements could have made Vexx stand out even more. Vexx is a highly entertaining platformer. Hopping around through most of the tight areas is excellent, and when you get the moves down just right, it has a flow that feels tuned well. I wish some features were used more in gameplay, and the camera could get in the way far more often than it should, but Vexx has the creativity to make up for it. I'd rather have a game with flaws, but is still entertaining, over something that's finely tuned, but just repeats the same game elements over and over. Vexx is just a fun platformer, and that's all it needs to be. Vexx runs at 480p on the Xbox and it looks solid. The character animations and details are all there. Vexx looks edgy and that makes him a relic of his time, but that also gives this game a bit of a charm today. A lot of the world does charming things. The world where you run tiny around the house is a standout level. There's so many small details and it's admirable how everything is such a giant scale and they still manage to draw so much color into it. There's also a desert level with a massive skeleton that you have to climb on, and there's giant visual elements like this that make the level design pop. There are a few lackluster looking levels like the frozen level and even the opening world. It has some good verticality with waterfalls to climb beside, but there's an insane amount of pop in. Elements in the distance seem to just pop into the game and it doesn't look great. On your wide open levels, this is a problem overall. I do though like the water in the game, which surprised me. There's an underwater dome level that has you swimming around in a hub world traveling to different domes in the water. It's really cool, and the water levels actually control fine. I like the small detail of hopping out of the water and some water droplets stay on your screen. Vexx shines in graphics and level design and looks good in 480p. It has some uninspired elements, but I enjoyed what it did as a whole. The soundtrack for Vexx is excellent. It hops around many different genres, and hearing that variety is so much fun. The composer Nelson Everhart does a great job capturing a mood. It can move from dark and brooding synths to light guitars or even just classical piano pieces. Multiple times I stepped back from what I heard and was surprised just where some of these tracks went. It's fun when you try so many different things with a soundtrack, and it excels at doing that here. It can be edgy, but it knows when to have fun. The sound effect work is solid too, with great punching noises and kicks. I like the small details of Vexx's little feet, making noise in every environment he steps on. He also growls and makes small noises when playing, and that adds a little edge to his character. I also like that he doesn't have unnecessary voice lines. I feel like in these platformers they love to throw in jokes and stuff like that, and you get none of that here, so it's not really annoying. Overall, the sound design is well done, with specific areas having great background noise that builds mood. It's a solidly designed game as far as sound goes, and has a great soundtrack to back it up. I had heard some bad stuff about Vexx going into it, but I also knew it had a cult following behind it, and I was genuinely interested to see if I would find it forgettable or an actually fun experience. And I'd say, despite its flaws, Vexx is a fun game. The platforming is challenging but rewarding. It's got a simple hub world setup and features a bunch of unique ideas. Sometimes the many elements don't gel together perfectly, but I like playing a game that takes some chances, and that makes the game memorable. The endurance sections are painful and do make certain sections of the game frustrating, and the camera can be a pain. These elements stop it from being a top tier platformer of its time, but it's better than a lot of other platformers that were getting shoveled out. It's creative and it has a cool style and a great look. Throw in that it has great compositions made for it, and I think Vexx is well worth giving a shot. I know it's nowhere near perfect, but there's enough entertainment here to make it a memorable experience. On my ranking list, where I rank every original Xbox game that I've covered on this channel, Vexx enters in at 36 out of the 86 games I've covered. I'd rather explore the world of pirates, but I'd rather revisit this one over Jedi Starfighter. When Vexx was released, it came out to mixed to average reception, holding a 70 on Metacritic. Not many publications or websites gave it an awful review, but many were just mixed on the whole experience. The most common complaint was that it was too much like older platformers and didn't take any leaps. GamePro harped on this, but gave it a 4 out of 5 for graphics, 3 for sound, and 3.5 for control and fun factor, stating that it was engaging, but just wanted something new. IGN would be slightly more upbeat with a 7.6, but they state pretty much the same thing. I guess its mileage just varied depending on your experience. Either you didn't like seeing the same stuff, or you thought it did the same stuff well. The official Xbox magazine in its April 2003 edition was on the higher scale, giving it a 7.9 out of 10. They didn't love the graphics, and they thought the story was a bit of a waste, but the level design and gameplay were a lot of fun for them. I don't think the world was going crazy for Vexx, and he wasn't hailed as Acclaim's next giant mascot. I believe the mixed reception and the 6th generation already having stellar platformers at this point didn't help either. I'm unsure of the exact sales numbers, but I suspect it wasn't very successful, especially since Acclaim Austin would close the year after this game came out due to bankruptcy. Nowadays, I believe Vexx has grown in cult status, and I've seen plenty of people bring it up in the comments. It's had multiple videos on YouTube made for it as well. The user aggregate website Backlog currently has it as a 2.8 out of 5 with 306 players. If you look at the reviews, you will see some people tearing this game apart or praising it to no end. It still holds a mixed status, but it's still talked about. And I think that's because it does at least try to be creative while still playing similarly to other platformers of the past. Nostalgia plays a part in it, with many having fond memories of this game, but I know there are people like me who never played this as a kid, and they still enjoy it. So I say just give it a shot. You might hate it or love it, but what's most important is at least trying it. But that does wrap it up for today. If you have any memories with Vexx, be sure to put them in the comments, or if you're just interested or not interested, let me know as well. Tell me what game I should cover next. Like if you enjoyed the review, it really helps out my channel. Subscribe to keep up with the retro Xbox content. And I want to thank my campers and camp counselors. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you here next time at Camp Xbox.